Story Bugs.
Hello, welcome to Story Time. Thanks for coming back. Tonight we're going to read a story called The Seasons in Fern Hollow. And this is written and illustrated by John Patience and published by Tailwater Press. And we're going to go through the seasons in this beautiful town. Spring, summer, winter, and fall. We're going to look at all the things happening in Fern Hollow. Spring. In Fern Hollow, as in other places, spring is a time of great activity, a time for gardening, for whitewashing, and for spring cleaning. It's a restless time of year when no one can stand still for very long. But after chatting to you for a minute or two, they will mumble, I really must get that door painted, or dear me, it's May already and I haven't planted my vegetables yet. And off they will rush to get things done. It was Easter time, and Monty was helping his father, Mr. Tuttleby, to repair the roof, while Spud and Heather played with their Easter eggs. In the shop, Mrs. Tuttleby was wrapping some spring flowers for Mr. Willowbank. They will be a nice surprise Easter present for Mrs. Willowbank, said the hedgehog. It was such a beautiful spring day, and it seemed so stuffy inside the old schoolhouse, that Miss Crisp decided to take her class out of doors. The lesson was in arithmetic, which was usually rather boring to everyone except Clarence Hoppet, who was clever at that sort of thing. But today, in the fresh air, arithmetic didn't seem too bad at all. Ooh, wouldn't that be nice to have school outside? It was a fine day for the spring jumble sale in the vicarage gardens, and Parson Dimley, who was looking after the lucky dip, was pleased to see that lots of animals had turned up. Mrs. Dimley took care of the refreshments, while Lupin had lots of fun on the jumble stall, which was filled with clothes the Fern Hollow animals had cleared out during their spring cleaning. Constable Hoppet was taking a walk with his family on his day off of work when they were caught in an April shower. Clarence and Clarissa hurried along with their mother, while Constable Hoppet picked up little Horace and raced on in front. Then under the shelter of the beech trees, they all watched the rainbow while they got their breath back and waited for the rain to stop. In Boris Blink's antiquarian bookshop, Boris and his assistant Leapy were spring cleaning when Professor Sigmund Swamp dropped in, looking for a book on famous toads. I think you will find one in that pile over there, said Boris. Dear me, exclaimed the professor. It would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. I think I'd better come back tomorrow when you've got the books back on the shelves again. Mr. and Mrs. Rusty had taken their cubs, Dusty, Rufus, and Redvers, out to fly a kite in the March winds. Rufus held on to the line, while Redvers chased around, trying to catch the kite's tail. But soon it was flying so far out of reach that it was almost touching the clouds. It's really hard to fly a kite. I've tried it. Have you tried flying a kite? All right, now it is summer. Everyone in Fern Hollow looks forward to the summer. to the lovely days spent picnicking by the River Ferny, and to the visits to the seaside. On their long summer holidays from school, the little animals go swimming and fishing, or play hide and seek in windy woods. The bumblebees bumble around amongst the wildflowers. Dragonflies zoom low over the river, and no one feels very much like work, though of course there is still plenty to be done. Mr. Bramble the farmer was in the middle of haymaking. The hay had already been baled, and now Tugger and Madge were helping to load it on the trailer. Little Tuppence was too small to help, but she had a comfy ride on top of the hay. In the middle of the afternoon, Mrs. Bramble arrived with lots of lovely things to eat and drink. Then the busy Badgers stopped work for a picnic. Professor Sigmund Swamp was retired and spent most of his time picnicking by the River Ferny. He had traveled abroad and lived in the tropics and was not at all worried by the hot weather. In fact, he was heard to remark that he thought the summer had been rather cool. Mr. Twinkle's family were spending a lovely summer's afternoon by the pool in the garden. Mrs. Twinkle was relaxing under the shade of a mushroom, while Mr. Twinkle floated pleasantly around the pool in an air bed. Sparky, Dash, and Skipper played around on the springboard, and Midge practiced her diving. The summer was so hot that the River Ferny had dried up, and there wasn't enough water to turn Mr. Croaker's mill wheel. "Never mind," said Mrs. Croaker. "We can all take a holiday until the rain begins to fall again." "Hooray!" cried Lily. "Can we go to the seaside?" "Yes, of course," chuckled Mr. Croaker. "And Dipper can sail his yacht in the sea." There's his little yacht in the puddle. At the railway station, Mr. Twinkle was having trouble with some foreign visitors who had lost their tickets. Fortunately, the problem was soon solved by old Stripey, the porter, who found the tickets lying on the platform. Meanwhile, Mr. Rusty, the engine driver, checked his wristwatch with Mr. Prickles and blew the bluebell's whistle to warn the passengers it was time to leave. At the Jolly Vole Hotel, Mrs. Crackleberry and Poppy were serving cold drinks and ice creams to the guests at the outside tables, when Jingle's taxi arrived with the foreign visitors. Mr. Crackleberry picked up the raccoon's family luggage and led them off to their room. Unfortunately, no one had remembered to pay Jingle. The next season after summer is autumn. Autumn is a beautiful time of year in Fern Hollow. The trees of Windy Wood turn golden, red, and orange, and there is a wonderful scent in the air. Unfortunately, the fallen leaves do cause the animals something of a problem, because they all like to keep their gardens tidy. Of course, you can always make a little bonfire of the leaves, but it is best to check with the way the wind is blowing first. Uh-oh, look at the smoke. It's going right into her laundry. Ooh, it's hard to get the smell of smoke out of your clothes. Mr. Prickles had taken a day off from his job as a guardsman at Fern Hollow railway station to gather fruits and nuts in Windy Wood. The expedition had been very successful, and Mr. and Mrs. Prickles and Polly had managed to fill their cart so well there was hardly room for another acorn. Jasper, Patch, Tugger, and Monty decided it would be fun to raid an orchard. Fortunately for them, P.C. Hoppet came by on his bicycle and caught them, all except Jasper the Squirrel, who was very quick at climbing up and down trees and managed to run away. Dilly and Pud's Halloween costumes were the best in the village. Oh, did I miss a page? Oh no, I guess Halloween is in the fall time, isn't it? Dilly and Pud's Halloween costumes were the best in the village. This was hardly surprising, as their parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thimble, were the Fern Hollow tailors. Dilly and Pud's friends were dressed in pixie or goblin costumes, and some of them wore masks so that you couldn't tell who they were. In the heart of Windy Wood, Mr. Chips and his sons, Chucky and Flip, were cutting down trees and chopping them up for firewood in preparation for the winter. The hard work had made them feel very hungry, and they were all pleased when Mrs. Chips shouted that the soup was ready. One gusty day in October, Lord Trundle was taking a stroll around the grounds at Trundleberry Manor when he bumped into old Blodger, his gardener, who was having trouble with the fallen leaves. Every time Blodger swept them into a neat little pile, the wind came along and blew them away again. Mrs. Bouncer had poked the baked potatoes out of the bonfire and handed them round to the children. "One for Patch, one for Pippa, and one for little Toby," she said. "Be careful, they're very hot." Mr. Bouncer lit a sky rocket, and it flew high into the night sky. "Good gracious," laughed Grandpa Bobber. "It looks like it's going all the way to the moon." Now this is the last season of the year. It's called winter. Winter in Fern Hollow is more often than not very cold, with plenty of snow. This suits some of the little animals very well. They can build snowmen, sledge, and skate on the Ferny River. But not everyone likes that sort of thing, and some say there is nothing better than gathering a great big stack of wood, making a nice warm fire, and maybe toasting a few crumpets. Are you an inside person or an outside person for the winter? Huh? I think I like both, actually. Mr. Willowbank was a marvelous cobbler and could usually mend an old shoe so that you wouldn't have known it from a new one. But when Spike brought him Mr. Bouncer's fireman's boots, he shook his head and said they would have to be thrown away. "How on earth did your boots get such enormous holes in them?" asked Mrs. Willowbank. "I put them by the fireside to dry," admitted Mr. Bouncer, "and they burnt." "That was a silly thing for a fireman to do," laughed Spike. Jasper and Podger bustled excitedly into Gruffy's shop. They had just emptied their piggy banks and found they might possibly have enough money to buy a sledge. Mr. Gruffy was very helpful and managed to find a super sledge at about the right price. Actually, it cost a little bit more than the two little squirrels had managed to save. But the kind old badger said, seeing as it was them, they could have it anyway. Mrs. Periwinkle could hardly believe her eyes. Mr. Periwinkle had forgotten to buckle up his post bag, and all the Trundleberry Christmas party invitations were blowing away. Fortunately, Wally managed to catch up with the bicycle, and Mr. Periwinkle came back to gather up the invitations. I hope I haven't lost any of them, he worried. No one wants to be left out of the party, I'm sure. A Christmas party, that sounds wonderful. Fergus was all tucked up in bed, suffering from a terrible cold. Not to worry, said his father, Dr. Bushy. We'll give you some medicine, and you'll be right as rain in no time. Yes, we must get you well quickly, Fergus, said Mrs. Bushy. The Trundleberry Manor party is only a few days away. In the bakery, Mr. Acorn was busy baking lots of delicious things to eat for the Christmas party. Jiggy watched her mother icing a cake, while Jasper did his best to help by fetching and carrying. As for little Podger, it was long past his bedtime, and he had fallen asleep on the floor. And then at last it was Christmas Day and time for the Trundleberry Manor Christmas party. Everyone turned up. Obviously, Mr. Periwinkle the postman hadn't managed to lose any of the invitations, and they all agreed that it was the best Christmas party there ever was. The end. We went through the entire year, all the seasons. Do you have a favorite season too? I think mine's the fall time when the leaves are changing colors. Thank you guys for joining me again. I hope you'll come back, and we'll see you next time. If you guys enjoyed reading that story, would you please click subscribe down below? We read new stories just like this one every day, and we would love to let you know when there's a new story to listen to.